Hello, everyone. Looks like we're live. This is my first time using the new YouTube system for going live, so hopefully this all works. Got my Guinness. Happy St. Patrick's Day. Before we get started, a quick shout out to a couple new patrons. Riddle Jacks, Dungeons on a Dime, and Redshift. Thank you for joining on Patreon. You guys are awesome. Today we're going to be reading the Dungeon Master's Guide. We're going to get through some of it. I think I did a rough calculation that doing the whole thing would be about 40 hours of reading. So we're definitely not doing that. We'll probably just do an hour or two. And then we'll have future streams where we'll go through more of it. Hopefully we'll get through the whole thing eventually. So this whole thing started because people have been telling me for years that I need to read it. It's kind of like the Bible of the old school. And I never read it. A lot of people haven't. It's quite a beast. So this is kind of an excuse for me to actually sit down and read the whole thing and read it fairly slowly, because I'll be reading it out loud. So hopefully that'll help me process it and really think about the things that are in there. Feel free to comment as I go through it. Hang out, get out some map and paper, start drawing yourself a dungeon, paint some miniatures, and let's go. So, the Dungeon Master's Guide for Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. It's an essential reference information for game mastering, advanced D&D, Dungeon Masters everywhere rejoice. Too long have you had to suffer along with crucial charts and tables spread through many works. Too long have you had to use makeshift references trying to solve the problem. Now you have a complete compilation of the most valuable material for your refereeing, the Dungeon Master's Guide. Herein you will find combat matrices, encounter tables, monster attacks alphabetically listed, treasure and magic tables and descriptions, gem values by type, random wilderness terrain generation, random dungeon generation, suggestions on game mastering, and a whole lot more. It is an absolute must for every dungeon master. Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. It's a special reference work. Not totally sure what that means. A compiled volume of information primarily used by advanced Dungeons & Dragons game referees, including combat tables, monster lists and encounters, treasure and magic tables and descriptions, random dungeon generation, random wilderness terrain generation, suggestions on game mastering, and more. We have the foreword. Is dungeon mastering an art or a science? An interesting question. If you consider the pure creative aspect of starting from scratch, the personal touch of individual flair that goes into preparing and running a unique campaign, or the particular style of moderating a game adventure, then dungeon mastering may indeed be thought of as an art. If you consider the aspect of experimentation, the painstaking effort of preparation and attention to detail, and the continuing search for new ideas and approaches, then dungeon mastering is perhaps more like a science, not always exacting in a literal sense, but exacting in terms of what is required to do the job well. Esoteric questions aside, one thing is for certain. Dungeon mastering is, above all, a labor of love. It is demanding, time-consuming, and certainly not a task to be undertaken lightly. The sheer bulk of the book that you hold in your hand will tell you that. But as all DMs know, the rewards are great. An endless challenge to the imagination and intellect, an enjoyable pastime to fill many hours with fantastic and often unpredictable happenings, and an opportunity to watch a story unfold and a grand idea to grow and flourish. The imagination knows no bounds, and the possibilities of a game of advanced Dungeons & Dragons are just as limitless. Who can say what awaits each player except a cornucopia of fantasy and heroic adventure? So much is waiting, indeed. This book holds much in store for you as a DM. It is your primary tool in constructing your own world or milieu. It contains a wealth of material, and combined with the other works of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, the Monster Manual and Player's Handbook, gives you all the information you need to play AD&D. But as always, one more thing is needed: your imagination. Use the written material as your foundation and inspiration. Then explore the creative possibilities you have in your own mind to make your game something special. Dungeon mastering itself is no easy undertaking, to be sure. But dungeon mastering well is doubly difficult. There are a few game masters around who are so superb in their conduct of play that they could disdain the opportunity to improve themselves in some way. Fortunately, this work addresses the matter at length and gives you plenty of suggestions on all aspects of dungeon mastering, as well as some of the finer points, in order to help you improve your own efforts. Take heed and always endeavor to make the game the best it can be, and all that it can be. Mike Carr, TSR Games and Rules Editor, 16th of May, 1979. So it has a note down here about the cover. The book cover painting shows an encounter between 3 adventurers and an Efreet on the elemental plane of fire. The fabled city of brass can be seen floating over a flame-swept sea of oil. I'm going to skip through the table of contents here. How is my sound level, by the way? My microphone's a little farther away than usual, just so I can read this a little better. We have our tables and charts down here. And we have the preface, written by Gary himself. What follows herein is strictly for the eyes of you, the campaign referee. As the creator and ultimate authority in your respective game, this work is written as one dungeon master equal to another. Pronouncements there may be, but they are not from on high as respects your game. Dictums are given for the sake of the game only. For if Advanced Dungeons & Dragons is to survive and grow, it must have some degree of uniformity, a familiarity of method and procedure from campaign to campaign within the whole. Advanced D&D is more than a framework around which individual DMs construct their respective milieu. It is above all a set of boundaries for all the worlds devised by referees everywhere. These boundaries are broad and spacious, and there are numerous areas where they are so vague and amorphous as to make them nearly non-existent, but they are there nonetheless. When you build your campaign, you will tailor it to suit your personal tastes. In the heat of play, it will slowly evolve into a compound of your personality and those of your better participants, a superior alloy. And as long as your campaign remains viable, it will continue a slow process of change and growth. In this lies a great danger, however. The systems and parameters contained in the whole of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons are based on a great deal of knowledge, experience gained through discussion, play, testing, questioning, and, hopefully, personal insight. Limitations, checks, balances, and all the rest are placed into the system in order to assure that what is based thereon will be a superior campaign, a campaign which offers the most interesting play possibilities to the greatest number of participants for the longest period of time possible. You, as referee, will have to devote countless hours of real effort in order to produce just a fledgling campaign, a background for the whole, some small village or town, and a reasoned series of dungeon levels, a lot of which must be suitable for elaboration and expansion on a periodic basis. To obtain real satisfaction from such effort, you must have participants who will make use of your creations, players to learn the wonders and face the perils you have devised for them. If it is all too plain and too easy, the players will quickly lose interest, and your effort will prove to have been in vain. Likewise, if the campaign is too difficult, players will quickly become discouraged and lose interest in a game where they are always the butt. Again, your labors will have been for naught. These facts are of prime importance for the underlie many rules. Naturally, everything possible cannot be included in the whole of this work. As a participant in the game, I would not care to have anyone telling me exactly what must go into a campaign and how it must be handled. If so, why not play some game like chess? As the author, I also realize that there are limits to my creativity and imagination. Others will think of things that I didn't, and devise things beyond my capability. As an active dungeon master, I keep a careful watch for things, which would tend to complicate matters without improving them. Systems devised seemingly to make the game drag for players. Rules which lessen the fantastic and unexpected in flavor of the mundane and ordinary. As if that were not enough hats to wear, I also wore that of a publisher, watching the work so as to make sure that it did not grow so large as to become unmanageable cost-wise. None of this was compromise per se, but the process was most certainly a refining of what should logically be presented in the system. Returning again to the framework aspect of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, what is aimed at is a universe into which similar campaigns and parallel worlds can be placed. With a certain uniformity of systems and laws, players will be able to move from one campaign to another and know at least the elemental principles which govern the new milieu. For all milieu will have a certain, but not necessarily the same, laws in common. Character races and classes will be nearly the same. Character ability scores will have the identical meaning, or nearly so. Magic spells will function in a certain manner, regardless of which world the player is functioning in. Magic devices will certainly vary, but their principles will be similar. This uniformity will help not only players, it will help DMs to carry on a meaningful dialogue and exchange of useful information. It might also eventually lead to grand tournaments, wherein persons from any part of the US, or the world for that matter, can compete for accolades. Little side note here, from what I have read, the tournament scene was extremely profitable for AD&D. So part of the reason for writing AD&D was to improve these tournaments, make them more uniform, and bring in a lot of extra income for the company. Hence, things get a lot more standardized here than in original D&D. The danger of a mutable system is that you or your players will go too far in some undesirable direction and end up with a short-lived campaign. Participants will always be pushing for a game which allows them to become strong and powerful far too quickly. Each will attempt to take the game out of your hands and mold it to his or her own ends. To satisfy this natural desire is to issue a death warrant to a campaign, for it will either be a one-player affair or the players will desert en masse for something more challenging and equitable. Similarly, you must avoid the tendency to drift into areas foreign to the game as a whole. Such campaigns become so strange as to no longer be AD&D. They are isolated and will usually wither. Variation and difference are desirable, but both should be kept within the boundaries of the overall system. Imaginative and creative addition can most certainly be included. That is why nebulous areas have been built into the game. Keep such individuality in perspective by developing a unique and detailed world based on the rules of advanced D&D. No two campaigns will ever be the same, but all will have the same common ground necessary to maintaining the whole as a viable entity about which you and your players can communicate with the many thousands of others who also find swords and sorcery role-playing gaming an amusing and enjoyable pastime. So already this is a little bit odd, especially when you compare it back to original D&D, where Gary goes out of his way over and over to tell you, this is your game, don't let anyone tell you how to run it. So by the time AD&D is coming out, he is getting much more particular. So yes, you can have creativity, yes, you can explore other worlds, but don't go too far, don't get too crazy. He wants to keep things constrained to make things more consistent. As this book is the exclusive precinct of the DM, you must view any non-DM player possessing it as a something less than worthy and honorable death. Peeping players there will undoubtedly be, but they are simply lessening their own enjoyment of the game by taking away some of the sense of wonder that otherwise arises from a game which has rules hidden from the participants. It is in your interest and in theirs to discourage possession of this book by players. If any of your participants do read therein, it's suggested that you assess them a heavy fee for consulting sages and other sources of information not normally attainable by the inhabitants of your milieu. If they express knowledge which could only be garnered by consulting these pages, a magic item or two can be taken as payment. Insufficient, but perhaps it will tend to discourage such actions. So this is just kind of loony, frankly. It has a weird perspective where players aren't supposed to be DMs for some reason. Because the goal, of course, at least in my mind, is to get players, to eventually run their own games. And Gary says that should never, ever happen. The player role and the DM role are totally distinct and must never be mixed. That's a little odd. I sincerely hope that you find this new system to your taste and enjoy it. The material is herein, but only you can construct the masterpiece from it. Your personal campaign, which will bring hundreds of hours of fun and excitement to many eager players. Masterful dungeoneering, or dungeoning, to you. Credits and acknowledgement. The following is an alphabetical list of all those persons who in some way contributed to the formation of this work. Naturally, each did not make an identical contribution, and those with whom I normally play AD&D, as well as those kind enough to review the initial manuscript, had more influence and engendered more ideas than those others with whom I do not have the privilege of continued close association or contact. Nevertheless, all are herewith credited and thanked, trusting that each will know what his or her own contribution was. We have Peter Aronson, Brian Bloom, Mike Carr, Sean Cleary, Jean-Louis Fiessen, Ernie, that well-known barbarian, Gaiax, Luke Gaiax, Al Hammock, Neil Healy, Tom Hulsinger, Harold Johnson, Timothy Jones, Tim Kask, Rick Krebs, Len Lafofka, I think, Jeff Leeson, Steve Marsh, Shar Niebling, Will Niebling, John Pickens, Gregory Wrin, John Sapienza, Lawrence Schick, Doug Schwegman, Dennis Stutare, Jack Vance. Jack Vance. He's a great fantasy writer. James M. Ward, Gene Wells, and Skip Williams. Also to be thanked are those uncounted DMs and players who have been eager to improve adventure gaming and have spent their valuable time to give me the benefit of their thinking by letter or through personal contact at conventions. Your efforts to find ways to do things better, to point out ambiguities or flaws, and general desire to aid and encourage me are appreciated. Bob Bledsaw of Judges Guild must also be given credit. He and his associates have certainly contributed to the overall improvement of fantasy adventure gaming, making the undertaking easier and encouraging still more interest in role-playing. Finally, no list of credits would be complete unless I especially thank the artists who have been so much help with the entire compilation of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. These artists are Dave Sutherland and Dave Trampier. Thank you, gentlemen. If by any chance I've neglected anyone, please forgive me, as the task of finishing the Dungeon Master's Guide has taken some 2 years, and during that time I have read hundreds of pages and suggestions, done thousands of pages of researching, and written about 1,200 pages of manuscript. A job begun in 1976, often interrupted, has at last been completed. Notes made months or years ago have a way of getting lost in the last-minute rush at the finish. So the big standout here, of course, is that Dave Arneson is not thanked. Dave Arneson was the guy who essentially created fantasy role-playing with his Blackmoor campaign and was the co-author of original Dungeons & Dragons. So with AD&D, Arneson is rather explicitly here written out of the D&D story. The whole development of AD&D was, at least in part, an excuse to exclude Arneson from receiving royalties, since it was considered to be a separate game, and therefore Arneson would not get paid for it. This did not end well. Arneson sued, and eventually, I think, did receive some compensation for it. Moving on to the introduction. The format of this book is simple and straightforward. The first sections pertain to material contained in the player's handbook. and each pertinent section is in corresponding order. Much information was purposefully omitted from the latter work, as it is data which would not normally be known, at least initially, to a person of the nature which this game presupposes, i.e., an adventurer in a world of swords and sorcery. It is incumbent upon all DMs to be thoroughly conversant with the player's handbook, and at the same time, you must also know the additional information which is given in this volume, for it rounds out and completes the whole. While players will know that they must decide upon an alignment, for example, you, the DM, will further know that each and every action they take will be mentally recorded by you. And at Adventure's End, you will secretly note any player character movement on the alignment graph. So this is something interesting, just because I tried reading the player's handbook years ago when I got interested in D&D. I thought, I'll just get the original book and I'll check this out. So I get the AD&D player's handbook, and it's completely inscrutable. There's so much in there that I couldn't fit together. I couldn't figure out how to play the game. That's because a lot of the rules are sort of divided between these two books. There are whole sections of the rules that players just don't get to know, and only the DM gets to know, which makes it very difficult to learn the game at all from just one book. Back to our introduction here. After the material which pertains directly to the player's handbook comes the information which supplements and augments. There is a large section which lists and explains the numerous magical items. There are sections on the development of the campaign milieu. He really likes the word milieu. Hopefully I'm saying that word correctly. Dungeon design, random creation of wilderness and dungeon levels, and the development of non-player characters. In fact, what I have attempted is to cram everything vital to the game into this book, so that you will be as completely equipped as possible to face the ravenous packs of players lurking in the shadows, waiting to pounce upon the unwary referee and devour him or her at the first opportunity. Thus, besides the systems, I have made every effort to give the reasoning and justification for the game. Of course, the ultimate reason and justification is a playable and interesting game, and how much rationalization can actually go into a fantasy game. There is some, at least, as you will see. For if the game is fantasy, there is a basis for much of what is contained herein, even though it be firmly grounded on worlds of make-believe. And while there are no optionals for the major systems of advanced D&D, for uniformity of rules and procedures from game to game, campaign to campaign, is stressed. There are plenty of areas where your own creativity and imagination are not bounded by the parameters of the game system. These are sections where only a few hints and suggestions are given, and the rest left to the DM. There is so much that could have been included herein that a major part of authoring this volume was deciding what would be omitted. The criterion was usefulness. First came material which was absolutely vital to play. Then came the inclusion of what would be most helpful to you. And finally, interesting items of broad appeal which tend to improve the flavor of a campaign were sifted into the work. Material included was written with an eye towards playability and expedition. The fun of the game is action and drama. The challenge of problem solving is secondary. Ooh, I really disagree with that, but that's interesting. The problem solving aspect of the game is the most fun part, in my opinion. Long and drawn out operations by the referee irritate the players. More realistic combat systems could certainly have been included here, but they have no real part in a game for a group of players having an exciting adventure. If you will do your best to keep the excitement level of your game at a peak, you will be doing yourself and your participants a favor, which will be evident when players keep coming back for more. The final word, then, is the game. Read how and why the system is as it is, follow the parameters, and then cut portions as needed to maintain excitement. For example, the rules call for wandering monsters, but these can be not only irritating, if not deadly, but the appearance of such can actually spoil a game by interfering with an orderly expedition. Now, that's a weird sentence to put in this book. So wandering monsters are a pretty integral part of dungeon crawling, especially in old games, because they add an element of danger and they keep the pace up. So he's saying that they might actually be a bad thing to have in your game, which is odd since he wrote the rule and put it into this book. So what's going on there? You will have set up an area full of clever tricks and traps, populated it with well thought out creative creature complexes, given clues about it to pique players' interest, and the group has already worked hard to supply themselves with everything by way of information and equipment that they will need to face and overcome the imagined perils. They are gathered together and eager to spend an enjoyable evening playing their favorite game, with the expectation of going to a new, strange area and doing their best to triumph. They are willing to accept the hazards of the dice, be it loss of items, wounding, insanity, disease, death, as long as the process is exciting. But lo, every time you throw the monster die, a wandering nasty is indicated, and the party's strength is spent trying to fight their way into the area. Spells expended, battered and wounded, the characters trek back to their base. Expectations have been dashed, and probably interest too, by random chance. Rather than spoil such an otherwise enjoyable time, omit the wandering monsters indicated by the die. No, don't allow the players to kill them easily or escape unnaturally, for that goes contrary to the major precepts of the game. Wandering monsters, however, are included for two reasons, as is explained in the section about them. If a party deserves to have these beasties inflicted upon them, that is another matter. But in the example above, it is assumed that they are doing everything possible to travel quickly and quietly to their planned destination. If your work as a DM has been sufficient, the players will have all they can handle upon arrival. So let them get there. Give them a chance. This game is the thing, and certain rules can be distorted or disregarded altogether in favor of play. It's such a strange thing to put in the introduction to your game, where he starts out by saying, here's a particular rule that I wrote that you probably shouldn't use at certain times. Instead of just saying, make decisions based on what you need, he actually starts out by telling you not to use a rule he wrote. Very weird. Know the game systems, and you will know how and when to take upon yourself the ultimate power. To become the final arbiter rather than the interpreter of the rules can be a difficult and demanding task, and it cannot be undertaken lightly, for your players expect to play this game not when made up on the spot. By the same token, they are playing the game the way you, their DM, imagines and creates it. Remembering that the game is greater than its parts, and knowing all of the parts, you will have overcome the greater part of the challenge of being a referee. Being a true DM requires cleverness and imagination, which no set of rule books can bestow. Seeing that you are clever enough to buy this volume, and you have enough imagination to desire to become the maker of a fantasy world, you are almost there already. Read and become familiar with the contents of this work, and the one written for players. Learn your monsters, and spice things up with some pantheons of super powerful beings. Then put your judging and refereeing ability into the creation of your own personal milieu, and you have donned the mantle of Dungeon Master. Welcome to the exalted ranks of the overworked and harassed, whose cleverness and imagination are all too often unappreciated by cloddish characters whose only thought in life is to loot, pillage, slay, and who fail to appreciate the hours of preparation which went into the creation of what they aim to destroy as cheaply and quickly as possible. Geez, Gary, tell us what you really think. And as a DM, you must live by the immortal words of the sage who said, "Never give a sucker an even break." Also, don't be a sucker for your players, and you'd better be sure they follow sage advice too. As the DM, you have to prove in every game that you are still the best. This book is dedicated to helping you assure. This book is dedicated to helping to assure that you are. That is so funny. The way that he just talks about players as harassing him constantly. Let's take a look at the comments over here. All right, getting into the game. Approaches to playing Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. A few brief words are necessary to ensure that the reader has actually obtained a game form which he or she desires. Of the two approaches to hobby games today, one is best defined as the realism simulation school, and the other as the game school. AD&D is assuredly an adherent of the latter school. It does not stress any realism, in the author's opinion, an absurd effort at best considering the topic. It does little to attempt to simulate anything either. Advanced Dungeons & Dragons is first and foremost a game for the fun and enjoyment of those who seek to use imagination and creativity. This is not to say that where it does not interfere with the flow of the game, that the highest degree of realism hasn't been attempted, but neither is a serious approach to play discouraged. In all cases, however, the reader should understand that AD&D is designed to be an amusing and diverting pastime, something which can fill a few hours or consume endless days, as the participants desire, but in no case something to be taken too seriously. For fun, excitement, and captivating fantasy, AD&D is unsurpassed. As a realistic simulation of things from their realm of make-believe, or even as a reflection of medieval or ancient warfare, or culture, or society, it can be deemed only a dismal failure. Readers who seek the latter must search elsewhere. Those who desire to create and populate imaginary worlds with larger-than-life heroes and villains, who seek relaxation with a fascinating game, and who generally believe that games should be fun, not work, will hopefully find this system to their taste. Dice. As the DM, the tools of your trade are dice, platonic, solid-shaped, or just about any other sort. The random numbers you generate by rolling dice determine the results based on the probabilities determined herein, or those you have set forth on your own. In case you are not familiar with probability curves, there are two types which are determined by your dice. Linear, straight lines, which has equal probability of any given integer in the number group, and bell, ascending and descending line, which has greater probability towards the center of the group of numbers than at either end. The two curves are illustrated thus. So here we have a linear curve and a bell curve. Linear probability develops a straight line of ascending probability when used as a cumulative probability as shown above. Bell distribution, when used to determine the probability of certain numbers appearing, develops a curved line like this. So this would be the curve for rolling 3d6. A single die or multiple dice read in succession, such as 3 dice read as hundreds, tens, and decimals, give linear probabilities. 2 or more dice added together generate a bell-shaped probability curve. This is really interesting as a side note, that he starts off with teaching you basic probability. So I haven't seen this done in any other Dungeon Master's guides, where I think this is really nice actually, in that he's kind of giving you the tools of the trade, and he's helping you understand how dice work, because then this allows you to use these tools to do your own things with them. It is a bit heavy to get right into the mathematics right at the start, though. A single die or multiple dice read in succession, such as 3 dice read as hundreds, tens, and decimals. Oh, wait, I read that one already. Before any further discussion takes place, let us define the accepted abbreviations for the various dice. A die is symbolized by D, and its number of sides is shown immediately thereafter. A 6-sided die is therefore D6. D8 is an 8-sided die, and so on. 2 4-sided dice are expressed by 2d4. 5 8-sided dice are 5d8, etc. Any additions or subtractions from the dice are the die or dice are represented after the identification. Thus, d8 plus 8 means a linear number grouping between 8 and 16, while 3d6 minus 2 means a bell-shaped progression from 1 to 16, with the greatest probability group in the middle, 8 or 9. This latter progression has the same median numbers as a 2d6, but has a higher and lower ends and a greater probability of a median number than if 2d12 were used. When percentage dice are to be used, this is indicated by D%. D4 can be used to generate 25% incremental probabilities. Random numbers from 1 to 4. With a +1, it generates a linear 2 to 5, etc. It can be used to get 1 or 2. 1 or 2 equals a 1, 3 or 4 equals 2. Or in conjunction with any other dice to get linear or bell-shaped probability curves. For example, 2d4 equals 2 through 8, 3d4 equals 3 through 12, d4 plus d6 equals 2 through 10, d4 plus d20 as a d10 equals 2 through 14. When rolled in conjunction with another die, the d4 can be used to determine linear number ranges twice that shown on the other die. Thus, d4 reading 1 or 2 means that whatever is read on the other die is the number shown. But if the d4 reads 3 or 4, add the highest number on the second die to the number shown. So if d8 is the second die, 1 to 16 can be generated. If a d12 is used, 1 to 24 can be generated. If a d20 is used, either 1 through 20, assuming the use of a standard d20, which is numbered 0 through 9 twice, without coloring one set of faces to indicate that those faces have 10 added to the number appearing. So, side note here, early D&D used a d20 that was only labeled 0 through 9 2 times. And then you have to differentiate between the second version of each number to represent, 10, 11, 12, etc. Or 1 through 40, assuming that one set of faces is colored, can be gotten by adding 0 or 1 or 2 is rolled on the d4 and 10 or 20, depending on die type. Boy, this is really dense and just going right over my head, frankly. If a 3 or 4 is rolled, linear series above this are possible simply by varying the meaning of the d4 number. 1 always means add 0, but 2 can be interpreted as add the value, highest number, of the second die. 3 can be twice value, and 4 can be thrice value. Thus, a d4 reading 4 in conjunction with a d8, linear curve 1 through 32, would mean 24 plus d8, or 25 to 32. What applies to a d4 has similar applications with regard to d6, d8, d12, and d20. Man, he's just going to keep going at this, isn't he? All right. The d6 has 16 and 2/3 percentage intervals. D8 has 12.5 intervals, and D20 can have 10% or 5% intervals. A D6 is useful when getting a random number from 1 to 3. 1 to 2 equals 1, 3 to 4 equals 2, 5 to 6 equals 3, while 1 to 5 can be easily read from a D20. 1 to 2 equals 1, 3 to 4 equals 2, 5 to 6 equals 3, 7 to 8 equals 4, and 9 to 0 equals 5. The D20 is used often, both as a D10 and a D20. The bell-shaped probability curves typically range from 2 through 20 to 5 to 50, i.e. 2, 3, 4, or 5 D20 added together. Also common is the reading as above with one decimal place added to the result to get to 20 through 200, 30 through 300, etc. In the latter case, a roll of 3 on one die and 0, read as 10, totals 13, plus one place, or 130. Non-Platonic solid-shaped dice are available in some places. The most common of these has a 10-sided die numbered 0 through 9. As with the D20, this can be used for many purposes, even replicating the D20 if a second die is used in conjunction to get 5% interval curves, 1 through 20. Also, the die can give a 0 through 9 linear curve random numbers, as the D20 can. Other dice available are various forms of averaging dice. The most common of these has 6 faces, which read 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, 5. The median of the curve it generates is still 3.5, that of a normal D6, but the low and high numbers, 2 and 5, are only half as likely to appear as 3 or 4. There is a 33.5%, 33 1/3% chance for either of the two latter numbers to be rolled, so the probabilities of absolute average rolls are far greater. Other such dice have zeros on them, several low numbers, and so on. These sorts of dice, along with poker dice, put and take dice, or any other sort, can be added in order to give you more flexibility or changing probabilities in random selection or event interpretation. For example, the author has a D6 with the following faces: spade, club, club, diamond, diamond, heart. If, during an encounter, players meet a character whose reaction is uncertain, the card suit die is rolled in conjunction with a 3d6. Black means dislike, with the spade equaling hate, while red equals like, and the heart means great favor. The 3d6 gives a bell-shaped probability curve of 3 through 18, with a 9 through 12 being the mean spread. Spade 18 means absolute and unchangeable hate, while heart 18s indicates the opposite. Clubs or diamonds can be altered by discourse, rewards, etc. Thus, clubs 12 could possibly be altered to clubs 3 by offering of a tribute or favor. Clubs 3 changed to diamonds 3 by a gift, etc. In closing this discussion, simply keep in mind that the dice are your tools. Learn to use them properly, and they will serve you well. Whoo-wee! All right, we're through the dice and math section. That's a bit of a rough patch there. What I find especially funny is that, from what I understand, at least, Gary didn't actually use most of this stuff when he was running his own games. He mostly, hold on a second. He mostly used AD&D, so with very minor tweaks. So Gary really appreciated really fast and simple gameplay. So it's funny that he has so much density here. The use of miniature figures with the game. The special figures cast for advanced Dungeons and Dragons add color to play and make refereeing far easier. Each player might be required to furnish painted figures representing his or her player character and all henchmen and or hirelings included in the game session. Such distinctively painted figures enable you to immediately recognize each individual involved. Figures can be placed so as to show their order of march, i.e., which figures are in the lead, which are in the middle, and which are bringing up the rear. Furthermore, players are more readily able to visualize their array and plan actions while seeing the reason for your restrictions on their actions. Monster figures are likewise most helpful, as many things become instantly apparent when a party is arrayed and their monster opponents placed. Furnishing such monsters is probably best undertaken as a joint effort, the whole group contributing towards the purchase of such figurines on a regular basis. Be very careful to purchase castings which are in scale. Out-of-scale monsters are virtually worthless in many cases. As a rule of thumb, HO scale is 25 millimeters, 1 actual inch, and 6 inches in scalar height or length or breadth. 1 actual inch equals 6 feet in scale height or length or breadth. So something I've noticed when shopping around on eBay is that you can still get a lot of the metal miniatures that Gary is talking about here. The funny thing is, if you find someone selling bulk packages of these old metal miniatures, often done by Grenadier or Ral Partha, they're often cheaper than plastic miniatures. I don't know why that is, but if you find a bulk package, you can often get them for $2 each or less, which is really awesome. I'm thinking of getting a whole bunch of them myself. Having them in metal is really, I don't know, there's a weight to them and a solidity to them that I really like. I have a few over here. So we have stuff like kind of this Beast Man here. What else? We got this. This is apparently like zombie Santa Claus. Some of my family got some of these for me for Christmas. Figure bases are necessarily broad in order to assure that the figures will stand in the proper position and not constantly be falling over. Because of this, it is usually necessary to use a ground scale twice that of the actual scale for HO. I'll be honest here, I don't really know what HO means. Human something? I'm not sure. And squares of about 1 actual inch per side are suggested. Each ground scale inch can then be used to equal 3 1/3 linear feet. So a 10-foot wide scale corridor is actually 3 inches in width and shown as 3 separate squares. Very interesting. So that's definitely a different scale than is typically used in modern D&D, where 1 inch equals 5 feet. Yeah. This allows depiction of the typical array of 3 figures abreast, and also enables easy handling of such figures when they are moved. While you may not find it convenient to actually use such figures and floor plans to handle routine dungeon movement, having sheets of squares for either area depiction will probably be quite helpful. If you do so, be certain to remember that ground scale differs from figure scale. So when dealing with length, 2 man-sized figures per square is quite possible, as the scale is actually 6 scale feet with respect to length. This is meaningful when attacking a snake, dragon, etc. If characters are able to attack the creature's body length, with respect to basically bipedal, erect opponents, scale will not be a factor. Details of preparation and painting your miniature figures for the game are not germane to this work. Your hobby supplier will have an assortment of small brushes and paints for such purposes, and you may inquire there as to the best techniques of painting. All right, time for some beer. Oh, on the comments here, it says that HO is model train scale. So that's good to know. So here we have aids to playing advanced Dungeons & Dragons. Various products such as modules, playing aids, and miniature figurines will be most helpful in establishing and maintaining an interesting and exciting campaign. There are so many such products available that it is not possible to detail each here, but some guidance can be given. Paper products range from record sheets for characters and special screens for the DM, which contain frequently consulted charts and tables on his or her side to complete dungeons or world scenarios. TSR provides a broad selection of such goods, some of which are listed in the back of this work. You can obtain a complete list by writing to TSR at the address shown on the cover and asking for a current catalog. The outlet for TSR products in Great Britain is TSR Hobbies, UK Limited, The Mill, Rathmore Road, Cambridge, CB1, 4AD, England. The only other source of approved and official AD&D material is Judges Guild, 1165 North University Avenue, Decatur, Illinois, 62526. Judges Guild publishes a large and continually expanding line of materials, and you should contact them for their current catalog. While there are many other works which appear to be useful in a campaign, only those bearing the advanced Dungeons & Dragons logo and approval marks should be used. Ooh, he's really doubling down on his branding here. Miniature figures used to represent characters and monsters add color and life to the game. They can also make the task of refereeing action, particularly combat, easier too. In combination with a gridded surface, such as the dungeon floor plans, to be published by TSR in the near future, these miniatures will add a whole new dimension to your playing enjoyment. It is suggested that you urge your players to provide painted figures representing their characters, henchmen, and hirelings involved in play. The monsters can be furnished by you, possibly purchased through collection of small fees levied on each playing session. The official Advanced Dungeons & Dragons miniature figures will be released by Grenadier Models, POB 305 Springfield, Pennsylvania, 19064, about November 1979. These figures are the only ones which comply in all respects to AD&D specifications and the AD&D Monster Manual. Contact Grenadier for an up-to-date listing of available figures. Other approved lines of fantasy figures, approved for use with Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, will be offered by select manufacturers. Always look for the name Advanced Dungeons & Dragons and the TSR approval mark before purchasing figures for your campaign. Hoo-wee! It is also very important to keep abreast of what is happening in the world of adventure gaming. You may do so by subscribing to such publications as The Dragon and White Dwarf. Fun fact, White Dwarf was originally more of a D&D publication, or it had a lot of role-playing stuff in it back in the early days. Now, of course, it's mostly just Warhammer stuff. or you might find it convenient to purchase them from your favorite gaming supplier. For current frequency and costs, drop a card or letter to the address shown below and ask for the latest information. United States, TSR Periodicals, POB 110, Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, 53147. Be certain to specify the names of the publications you are interested in. Again, a word of warning. Many products might purport to be satisfactory for use with advanced Dungeons & Dragons, but only those noted as official or authorized AD&D items should be accepted. Do not settle for substitutes or second-rate material in your campaign. Ask for approved AD&D products only. Creating the player character. So this is, again, very odd to a modern gamer, seeing the character creation rules are actually in here and not in the player's handbook. If you bought the player's handbook, you would literally not know how to make a character. Generation of ability scores. As AD&D is an ongoing game of fantasy adventuring, it is important to allow participants to generate a viable character of the race and profession which he or she desires. While it is possible to generate some fairly playable characters by rolling 3d6, there is often an extended period of attempts at finding a suitable one due to quirks of the dice. Furthermore, these rather marginal characters tend to have short life expectancy, which tends to discourage new players, as it's having to make do with some characters of a race or class which he or she can't or won't identify with. Character creation, then, is a serious matter, and it is recommended that the following systems be used. 4 alternatives are offered for player characters. Method 1. All scores are recorded and arranged in the order the player desires. 4d6 are rolled, and the lowest die or one of the lower is discarded. So that's fairly traditional. It's been around for a long time. When I first started playing 3rd edition, that's how my DM did it. So that's been going back for quite a ways. All scores are recorded and arranged as in Method 1. 3d6 are rolled 12 times, and the highest 6 scores are retained. Method 3. Scores rolled are according to each ability category in order: Strength, Intelligence, Wisdom, Dexterity, Constitution, Charisma. 3d6 are rolled 6 times for each ability, and the highest score in each category is retained for that category. Method 4. 3d6 are rolled sufficient times to generate the 6 ability scores in order for 12 characters. The player then selects the single set of scores which he or she finds most desirable, and these scores are noted on the character record sheet. So this is a big change from what we might have seen in OD&D or even in BXD&D. This is going to tend to create characters that are much stronger and have much higher stats than just rolling 3d6 in order. Oh, I see people in the comments are rolling up their own characters. Yeah, go for it. See if you can make someone that's actually playable. I know that there was a lot of rules in earlier versions of the game for what to do with characters that were basically useless. I think those are fun, though. Non-player characters. Non-player characters. You should, of course, set the ability scores of those NPCs you will use as parts of the milieu, particularly those of high level and power. Scores for high-level NPCs must be high. How else could these figures have risen to so high? Determine the ability scores of other non-player characters as follows. General characters. Roll 3d6 for each ability as usual, but use average scoring by considering any 1 as a 3 and any 6 as a 4. Special characters, including henchmen. Roll 3d6 as for general characters, but allow the full range, 3 through 18, except in the ability or abilities which are germane to his or her profession, i.e. strength for fighters, etc. For all such abilities, either use one of the determination methods used for player characters, or add +1 to each die of the 3 rolled, which scores under 6. The effect of wishes on character ability scores. It is quite usual for players to use wishes, or alter reality spells found on scrolls, to increase their ability scores in desired areas, whatever the areas might be. It is strongly suggested that you place no restrictions upon such use of wishes. However, at some point it must be made more difficult to go up in ability, or else many characters will eventually be running around with several 18s or even higher. That's a little odd, given that the rules for these 4 methods here are pretty much going to create 18s pretty frequently, I think. Getting a character with multiple 18s is certainly not out of the question when you're using these. Therefore, when any ability score reaches 16, then it should be ruled a wish will have the effect of increasing the ability by only 1/10 of a point. Thus, by means of wishes and/or alter reality spells, a charisma score of 16 can only be raised to 17 by the use of 10 such wishes. The score going from 16 to 16.1 with the first wish, 16.2 with the second wish, and so on. This is not to say that magical books or devices cannot raise scores of 16 or better a full point. The prohibition is only on wishes. What a weirdly specific thing to put in there. It makes me think that wishes were much more common than we see in normal D&D. Characteristics for player characters. Use of the NPC personality traits and characteristics for player characters is not recommended. I'm not totally sure what he's talking about here. Maybe there's a table later on with NPC personality traits. The purpose of AD&D is to allow participants to create and develop interesting player characters who will adventure and interact with their surroundings. If personality traits are forced upon PCs, then participants will be doing little more than moving automatons around while you, the DM, tell them how their character react to situations. It is therefore absolutely necessary for you to allow each player the right to develop his or her character as he or she chooses. This is not to say that some of the information used for development of NPCs cannot be used for PCs. If a player asks to have you make certain determinations for his or her character, you may do so if you believe that the player will be able to properly act the part as dictated by the dice rolls. Height and weight should be randomly determined for each PC, and the height and weight tables in the Personae of Non-Player Characters section are useful in this regard. However, these tables do not actually give sufficient variation in upper limits of height and weight of humans, so you might find it necessary to allow the following height and weight variations for human player characters. Human male, height 2 through 20 inches, weight 10 through 200, pounds. Human female, height 2 through 12 inches, weight 10 through 120 pounds. Yeah, I don't know what that means. Player character non-professional skills. When a player character selects a class, this profession is assumed to be that which the character has been following previously, virtually to the exclusion of all other activities. Thus, the particular individual is at first level of an ability. However, some minor knowledge of certain mundane skills might belong to the player character. Information and training from early years or incidentally picked up while the individual was apprenticeship, learning his or her primary professional skills of clericalism, fighting, etc. If your particular campaign is aimed at a level of play where secondary skills can be taken into account, then use the table below to assign them to player characters, or even to henchmen if you so desire. To assign a skill randomly, or select according to the background of your campaign. To determine if a second skill is known, roll on the table, and if the dice indicate a result of 2 skills, then assign a second skill. Then assign a second appropriate one. So our secondary skills table include things like armorer, bowyer or fletcher, farmer or gardener, fisher, forester or gambler, hunter or fisher, husbandman, jeweler, lapidary, leather worker or tanner, limner or painter, mason or carpenter, miner, navigator, sailor, ship, tailor, weaver, teamster and freighter, trader or barterer, trapper or furrier, woodworker or cabinet maker, no skill of measurable worth, or roll twice ignoring this result hereafter. When secondary skills are used, it is up to the DM to create and/or adjudicate situations in which these skills are used or useful to the player character. As a general rule, having a skill will give the character the ability to determine the general worth and soundness of an item, the ability to find food, make small repairs, or actually construct crude items. For example, an individual with armor skill could tell the quality of normal armor, repair chain links, or perhaps fashion certain weapons. To determine the extent of knowledge in question, simply assume the role of one of these skills, one that you know a little something about, and determine what could be done with this knowledge. Use this as a scale to weigh the relative ability of characters with secondary skills. See also the campaign, social class, and rank in AD&D. So there really aren't any rules for secondary skills here. You just have them or you don't, and it's up to the DM to figure out how effective they are. Presumably not very effective. OD&D Spec Ops, thank you for the tip. I really appreciate that. I will refill my ale. Cheers. Starting level of experience for player characters. As a general rule, the greatest thrill for any neophyte player will be the first adventure, when he or she doesn't have any real idea of what is happening, how powerful any encountered monster is, or what rewards will be gained from the adventure. This assumes survival, and you should gear your dungeon to accommodate first level players. I like how it says your dungeon. So it seems like the assumption here really is that as a DM, you are expected to have a dungeon, presumably a very large multi-level dungeon that gets more deadly as you go down. If your campaign has a mixture of experienced and inexperienced players, you should arrange for the two groups to adventure separately, possibly in separate dungeons at first. Allow the novice players to learn for themselves, and give experienced players tougher situations to face, for they already understand most of what is happening, quite unlike true first-level adventurers of the would-be sort, were such persons actually to exist. If you have an existing campaign, with the majority of players being already above first level, it might be better to allow the first newcomers to begin at second level or even third or fourth in order to give them a survival chance when the group sets off for some lower dungeon level. I do not personally favor granting unearned experience levels except in extreme circumstances, such as just mentioned, for it tends to rob the new players of the real enjoyment he or she would normally feel upon actually gaining levels of experience by dint of cleverness, risk, and hard fighting. It has been called to my attention that new players will sometimes become bored and discouraged with the struggle to advance in level of experience, for they do not have any actual comprehension of what it is like to be a powerful character of high level. In a well-planned and well-judged campaign, this is not too likely to happen, for the superior DM will have just enough treasure to whet the appetite of players, while keeping them lean and hungry still, and always after that carrot just ahead. And one player's growing ennui, I should know how to pronounce this word, but I don't really. I think it's ennui, can often be dissipated by rivalry, i.e., he or she fails to go on an adventure, and those who did play not only had an exciting time, but brought back a rich haul as well. Thus, in my opinion, a challenging campaign and careful refereeing should obviate the need for immediate bestowal of levels of experience to maintain interest in the game. However, whatever the circumstances, if some problem such as this exists, it has been further suggested that allowing relatively new players to participate in a modular campaign game, assuring new players of characters of higher level, would often whet their appetites for continued play at a lower level, for they can then grasp what it will be like should they actually succeed in attaining proficiency on their own by working up their original characters and gaining high levels of experience. This reasoning seems sound, And provided there is a separation of the two campaigns, and the one isn't begun until new players have had some number of expeditions as first-level characters, it is not destructive to the game as a whole. Boy, Gary really likes having long sentences and lots of clauses. Character age, aging, disease, and death. Character age. At the onset of each and every character's creation, it is necessary that you establish his or her age. For player characters and henchmen, you must use the appropriate table. You may do the same for other characters, or you may assign age as you see fit in light of the milieu you have developed. There are two tables, one for non-humans, the demi-humans, part humans, and the like, and one for humans. We have a non-human character table here. I'm not going to read out these tables. I don't think anyone would gain anything out of that. For multi-class characters, use the column which develops the highest age and use the greatest possible addition to the base age, i.e., do not generate the age variable by random die roll, but assign the maximum. We have a table for humans. Different classes get different ages, which I suppose makes sense. Bards begin at the age of the class in which they first begun. Once character age is established, you must keep track of it from game year to game year. CF, time in the campaign. To normal game time, years must be added any of the various unnatural causes of shortening life, i.e. aging. So there's spells and so on that can affect your age. These effectively add years to the character's age. The effects of aging are given in the next section. The maximum age of any character is likewise explained. Aging. In order to establish the overall effects of age, it is necessary to establish a number of standard age brackets for each race of characters. When age category is established, modify ability scores accordingly, making each change progressively from young adulthood, all additions and subtractions being cumulative. The only ability which may exceed 18 due to age effects, unless age restricts this, is wisdom. Most adjustments are in the whole numbers so that 18 strength drops to 17, even if it is from 18/00, as exceptional strength is not considered. So we haven't actually read this section yet. Maybe it'll get to it eventually, but you can have strength higher than 18, because if you rolled an 18, you would roll a D%, I believe, to give you a number from 1 to 100, telling you how good you were in the 18 range, allowing for even more gradations. How that actually affects anything, I'm not totally sure. There's some age categories here. So young adults, subtract 1 point of wisdom and add 1 point of constitution. Mature characters, add 1 point of strength, add 1 point of wisdom. Middle-aged, subtract 1 point, or half exceptional rating, of strength and 1 point of constitution, add 1 point of intelligence and 1 point of wisdom. Old, subtract 2 points of strength, 2 points of dexterity, and 1 point of constitution, add 1 point of wisdom. Venerable, subtract 1 point of strength, 1 point of dexterity, and 1 point of constitution, add 1 point of intelligence and 1 point of wisdom. That's a little bit interesting, that if you have a really old character, they will be better at their mental stats in general. It is important to remember that adjustments cannot exceed racial maximums, nor can they be used if they cause abilities to exceed stated maximums. Likewise, any adjustments cannot lower any ability below racial or class minimums. Unnatural aging. Certain creatures will cause unnatural aging, and in addition, various magical factors can do so. The following magic causes a loss of lifespan, aging the practitioner as indicated. See also disease for other unnatural aging causes. Longevity potions and possibly other magical means will offset such aging to some extent. So we have a number of different types of spells which can affect your age. So these are interesting. So things like wish spells and casting gate spells actually drain your life, it looks like. Huh. Reading one of the above spells from a scroll or using the power from a ring or other device does not cause unnatural aging, but placing such a spell upon the scroll in the first place will do so. See death due to age, subsection in death. Disease. As with poisons, the system does not attempt a specific treatment of a subject which is beyond its scope and purpose. What is done, however, is to give general categories of disease and maladies and their game effects, as well as the chance to contract an ailment according to the surroundings. Naturally, you will often have to have no need for any random determination of a disease, as the affliction will be specified. But even then, you will find that the random determinations for occurrence and severity might be helpful. Contraction of diseases. Each game month, you may wish to check each character to determine whether or not he or she has contracted a disease or disorder. Check each week if conditions are particularly favorable. Very hot weather or hot, moist weather, filthy, crowded conditions in warm weather. Check each and every time the character is exposed to a carrier in a way which would allow the disease to be communicated. Note that disease carriers can be human, animal, insect, food, drink, vermin, dirt, filth, etc. As DM, you must indicate any special disease circumstances applicable. Contraction of parasitic infections. Each game month, check for each character to determine if he or she has become infected with some form of parasite. Boy, this is a rough game. Getting infected in the D&D. Crawling with parasites. So filthy conditions and warm temperature. Hot, moist weather. Check each and every time the character is exposed to a carrier of parasites. Carriers include humans, animals, dust, earth, manure, raw or undercooked meat, swamp, water, etc. Checks are made by using the appropriate tables shown hereafter. Chance of contracting disease. Base chance is 2%, and that percentage can go up based on all of these different categories, different modifiers. This is funny. People complain about 3E being finicky with all the little modifiers. Procedure. Adjust base chance of disease being contracted by applying modifiers. When the final percent chance to a disease is found, roll for each character concerned. If a disease is indicated, go to the disease table below to determine what sort is contracted. Chance of parasitic infection, same deal. You have a base chance of 3% for some reason. Why is it 1% higher than getting a disease? I don't know. And you add your modifiers. We have a disease or disorder table. You can roll a D100, and you get all sorts of fun things. Where does it affect you? And you got parasitic infections, mostly just where it's affecting you. Mild, severe, or terminal. So it's totally possible in AD&D that you sort of like wander into a swamp, have a swamp adventure, come out, and you have like a parasitic infection, and then you roll really badly, and it's terminal. This thing is going to eat you. That's funny. Occurrence determines whether disease is a single acute attack or whether the disease will recur periodically once contracted, chronic. Chronic maladies will affect the player character periodically, and if they occur at the same time as any other malady, disease, disorder, or parasitic infection, the severity of both will be increased. Thus, if 2 chronic maladies are contracted, the character is not likely to survive another disease attack. It's so interesting that this is like right at the beginning of the book. Like the first thing you need to know is, will your character get a parasite? Severity refers to the seriousness of the disease, disorder, or parasitic infestation, and determines the period of disability, recovery time, or length of illness, which terminates in the character's demise, and the effects of the malady. So mild, during the period of affliction, the character is unable to perform strenuous activities and must rest. Some treatment must be determined by the DM to allow a shortening of the period of illness. A normal period is 1 to 3 weeks. Severe. A severe malady will lower the character's hit points to 50% of normal and make him or her totally disabled for 1 to 2 weeks, plus a further 1 to 2 weeks of time during which the malady is in the mild state as the character recovers. So you can be out for up to a month. Terminal, the malady will cause death or loss of the body part or function. In 1 to 12 days, longer periods are stated hereafter in the discussion of the various maladies. Now, this seems like really rough to us nowadays, but as people have pointed out to me before, in AD&D times in like the 70s, it was really not uncommon for players to have a whole stable of characters. They wouldn't necessarily just have one that they played all the time. You could have 2, 3, or 4 or 5 characters. You weren't playing them simultaneously, but you could switch between them. So it was totally viable to have a character get injured and be out of play for like a month. And you could just send them off to the city, they're recovering, and then you pull out a different character and you play with them instead. So what are the different types of, or what are the different sections of your body that could be affected here by different diseases? Blood. Afflictions will cause a loss of 1 point of each of strength and constitution per week until totally cured. Thus, chronic problems here will slowly wear the character away. Terminal cases will take 1 to 12 weeks. Bone afflictions are much the same as blood problems, and chronic cases and terminal afflictions can be treated in the same way. Brain problems will cause a loss of 1 point each of intelligence and dexterity per occurrence until totally cured. So chronic maladies will eventually be fatal. Terminal affliction takes only 1 to 12 hours for death to occur. Cardiovascular renal afflictions should be treated in the same manner as blood problems, except that terminal cases only last 1 to 12 days. Connective tissue diseases, such as leprosy, permanently remove 1 point each of strength, dexterity, constitution, and charisma for each month of affliction. Thus, only an active, mild attack will not cause such loss. Terminal cases will last until constitution is at 0, i.e. treat them as chronic, severe cases. Ear afflictions, which are terminal, result in hearing loss in 1 ear. Eye afflictions, which are terminal, result in blindness in 1 or both eyes, 50-50 chance for either case. Gastrointestinal problems of chronic nature cause a loss of 1 point each of strength and constitution per occurrence until cured. Severe attacks causing such loss permanently. Terminal cases require 1 to 12 weeks for fatality. Generative organ, quote unquote, disorders cause no particular problems except spread of infection. There's just an ellipses there. It doesn't tell you what it's talking about. Terminal cases take 1 to 12 months. Joint disorders of a chronic nature cause the loss of 1 point of dexterity, with each severe attack causing such loss on a permanent basis. Mucous membrane problems of a chronic nature cause the loss of 1 point of constitution, each severe attack causing such loss permanently. Muscle disorders of a chronic nature cause the loss of 1 point each of strength and dexterity, severe attacks having a 25% chance of causing such loss permanently. Terminal cases take 1 to 12 months. Nose throat afflictions of a chronic nature have a 10% chance of causing a 1 point constitution loss each time a severe attack occurs. Skin afflictions of severe nature are 10% likely to cause permanent loss of 1 point of charisma. Chronic mild attacks are also 10% likely to cause such loss, while chronic severe attacks will be 25% likely to cause such loss. Terminal cases will take 1 to 12 weeks for fatality. Urinary system disorders of a chronic severe nature are 20% likely to cause the loss of 1 point each of dexterity and constitution per occurrence. Terminal cases will take 1 to 12 weeks. And then we have a table of adjustments to occurrence and severity die rolls. So these can be altered. We have our next section, death. The character faces death in many forms. The most common, death due to combat, is no great matter in most cases, for the character can often be brought back by means of a clerical spell or an alter reality or wish. Of course, recovery of damage sustained might be a problem, but that is not insurmountable. Death due to age. This is a serious matter, for unless the lifespan can otherwise be prolonged, the character brought back from such death faces the prospect of soon dying again. Beyond the maximum age determined for the character in question, no form of magic which does not prolong lifespan will work. Thus, some characters may become liches. Of course, multiple potions of longevity, wishes, and possibly magical devices will allow a greatly extended lifespan. But once a character dies due to old, venerable age, then it is all over. If you make this clear, many participants will see the continuity of the family line as a way to achieve a sort of immortality. Well, that's interesting. The assumption is that you might actually want to start having kids in game. Determination of maximum age. Unless the character dies of some other cause, he or she will live to old age. Use the following table to find the exact age at which a character will die of natural causes. Interesting. So we have a table of maximum character age. You roll a percentage. And it helps you figure out your maximum age. Example of maximum age determination. The dice rolled indicate the dwarf character will live to an old age. Lowest figure, plus D8. As the span considered is 100 years, D8 stands for decades, so the character will live for 251 years, plus 10 to 80 years, plus 0 to 9 years. Now that isn't a complicated system at all. The same dwarf considered above is to live to an old age, highest figure, minus 4. The variable is minus 10 to minus 40 years, minus 0 to minus 9 years. The dice rolled for half-orc character indicate that he will live to a venerable age, highest figure, plus D20. As the span considered is under 100 years, the character will live for 80 years, plus 0 to 19 years, or 80 to 99 years. As a result of 20 equals 0 years added to maximum venerable age shown for the character's race. The dice show that a high elf character will live to venerable age, lowest figure, plus D6. As the span of years for this character race is 400 years, the character will live to be 1,201 plus 20, or 120 years, plus 0 to 19 years, or to an age of 1,221 to 1,340 years. Assume that the D6 shows 4, so 80 years are added. 4 times 20 equals 80 to bring the lifespan to 1,281, 1,201 plus 80. And then D20 is rolled and a 0 comes up, so a total lifespan is 1,281 years. 1,201 plus 80 plus 0 equals 1,281. What a loony system for finding maximum age determination. There has got to be an easier way to do this. There's 180 people in here. What are you guys doing in here? What, you guys are having a fun time. Alrighty, here. Moving on. Death due to diseases or disorders or parasitic infections. Any character brought back from such a state will suffer the ravages of disease or infestation, permanent losses in abilities, for example, until magically countered. Furthermore, such a character will be 90% likely to still be suffering from the cause of death, unless a curative is used. Even then, the character will have to spend time recovering as if from a severe illness. Ability losses which have been permanently sustained will not be corrected by a curative of any sort, including a cure disease spell. Magical corrections, wishes, alter reality spells, and magical devices will certainly correct these deficiencies. Character abilities, explanation of abilities. Now, you think that this would go much earlier in the book, explaining what these things are. This is an odd book in the sense that it's supposed to be very comprehensive, and I think it's trying to rectify the problem of original D&D, which was very obscure and difficult to understand. This is in a way easier to understand just by being unbelievably verbose, but it's funny in that it's terrible at teaching you how to play the game. So if you're a brand new dungeon master and you've just heard of Dungeons and Dragons and you pick up this book, you're going to get lost really quickly. I think the assumption was that you would in fact start with basic D&D, which is a whole separate line published by TSR, and which actually explains really well how to play the game. So moving from basic D&D to advanced would be really helpful. So we start with strength. Strength. The strength characteristic of a human or humanoid of any type, and of player characters in particular, is more than a simple evaluation of the musculature of the build. Strength is a composite rating of physical power, endurance, and stamina. A rating of 3, for example, indicates that the creature in question has little of each of the 3 categories. A score of 10 or thereabouts shows that the creature has the norm for a human adult male, based on an assumed medical medieval standard, where the typical individual was in good shape due to the necessity of hard labor, while the score of 18 means that the creature has a composite rating for far above average in all respects. By way of comparison, kobolds will have an average strength rating of 9, goblins 10, orcs 12, hobgoblins 15, gnolls 16, bugbears 17, ogres 18, and trolls a strength rating of 18 plus. Gnomes have an average strength rating of 10, dwarves 14, elves 12, halflings 8, and giants 19 and up. Exceptional strength. Assume further that a strength of 18 indicates that the creature can lift weight equal to his own body weight, or 180 pounds, whichever is greater, above his head. This rating is modified by a restriction that no creature of human/humanoid nature can lift more than twice its own body weight above its head. A human with an 18 strength and an additional percentile dice roll is able to lift 1 additional pound for every percentage point up to and including 50%. 4 points for every percentage point from 51 to 90%, and 8 points for each percentage point from 91% to 100%. So I think you do roll a percentage dice if you roll an 18, although it's stated rather obscurely. Intelligence. The intelligence rating roughly corresponds to our modern IQ scores. However, it assumes mnemonic, reasoning, and learning ability skills in additional areas outside the written word. Wisdom. For some game purposes, wisdom ability assumes the categories of willpower, judgment, wile, enlightenment, and intuitiveness. An example of the use of wisdom can be given by noting that while the intelligent character will know that smoking is harmful to him, he may well lack the wisdom to stop. This writer may well fall into this category. Dexterity. The dexterity rating includes the following physical characteristics: hand-eye coordination, agility, reflex speed, precision, balance, and actual speed of movement in running. It would not be unreasonable to claim that a person with a low dexterity might well be quite agile, but have low reflex speed, poor precision, bad balance, and be slow of foot, but slippery in the grasp. Constitution. This character ability rating is a general heading under which falls the character's physique, health, resistance, and fitness. An individual who catches cold, if exposed to a slight draft, has a constitution of 5 or less in all probability. Rasputin had an 18 constitution. Charisma. Many persons have the sad misconception that charisma is merely physical attractiveness. This error is obvious to any person who considers the subject with perceptiveness. Charisma is a combination of physical appearance, persuasiveness, and personal magnetism. True charisma becomes evident when one considers such historical examples of Julius Caesar, Napoleon Bonaparte, and Adolf Hitler. Obviously, these individuals did not have an 18 score on physical beauty, but it is quite possible to assume that scores over 18 are possible. For any one of the named historical personalities would have had a higher charisma score, there can be no question that these individuals were 18s. If they would have had great attractiveness as well as commanding personal magnetism and superb persuasiveness. Character races. Player character racial tendencies. As a general rule, the player will develop the personality and other characteristics of his or her personae in the campaign, and little to no DM interference is necessary in this regard. To find the general height and weight of a PC, use the tables given for development of NPCs. Alignment must certainly affect, if not dictate, much of the actual behavior of each PC, and so it will affect characteristics as well. In this regard, it is important for you to see that the particular characteristics of each persona meet with the overall character and alignment of the individual adventurer concerned. Racial characteristics can also be a factor. Consider the following guidelines. Dwarves tend to be dour and taciturn. They are given to hard work and care little for most humor. They are strong and brave, but they also enjoy beer, ale, mead, and even stronger drink. Their chief love, however, is precious metal, particularly gold. They also enjoy gems, of course, particularly those of opaque nature, especially pearls, except pearls, which they do not like, and diamonds. They like the earth and dislike the sea. Considering that their women tend to be bearded also, it is not surprising that some dwarves are somewhat forward in their behavior towards females not so adorned. If dwarves are a trifle suspicious and avaricious, they generally make up for such faults by their courage and tenacity. It's interesting that he actually recommends that players stick with the different fantasy race stereotypes, given that he places such an emphasis on players creating their own persona. Elves are often considered flighty or frivolous, and this is the case when they do not believe a matter to be of import. They concern themselves with the natural beauty around them, dancing and frolicking, playing and singing, unless necessity dictates otherwise. Because elves love nature, they are not fond of ships or mines, but of growing things in the lands under the sky. They do not make friends easily, but friend or enemy is never forgotten. Their humor is clever, as are their songs and poetry. Elves are brave, but never foolhardy. They feast, but eat sparingly, drink mead and wine, but seldom become drunk from excesses. While they find well-wrought jewelry a pleasure to behold, they are not overly interested in money or gain. Magic fascinates elves, however, and if they have a weakness, it lies in this desire. If elves tend towards haughtiness or arrogance at times, they are not inclined to regard their friends and associates as anything other than equals. Gnomes are most lively and full of humor, often on the black side or practical jokes. They enjoy eating and can drink as much as dwarves do. They are sly and furtive with those they do not know and trust, and even somewhat reserved with most bigger folk, such as elves or humans. Gnomes love all sorts of precious stones, and they are makers of gem polishing and cutting. In most other respects, they are not unlike dwarves, but they enjoy the open world of growing things almost as much as their mines and burrows. Half-elves are usually much like their elven parents in characteristics, although somewhat lesser extent than a pure elf. Halflings are quite similar to gnomes, although they eat more and drink less. They are prone to favor natural beauty and the outdoors more than they do their burrows. They are not forward, but they are observant and conversational, if in friendly company. Because they are more open and outgoing than either dwarves or elves, they get along with most other races far better than the former two do. Halflings see wealth as a means of gaining comforts only, for they love creature comforts. If they are not gaining comforts only, they love creature comforts. Oh, I misread that. If they are not overly brave or ambitious, they are generally honest and hardworking when there is a need. Halflings love stories and good jokes and are perhaps a trifle boring at times. Half-orcs are bores. They are rude, crude, crass, and generally obnoxious. Because most are cowardly, they tend to be bullies or cruel to the weak, but they will quickly knuckle under to the stronger. This does not mean that all half-orcs are horrid, only most of them. It means neither means that they are necessarily stupid nor incapable. They will always seek to gain the upper hand and dominate those around them so as to be able to exercise their natural tendencies. Half-orcs are greedy too. They can, of course, favor their human parent more than their orcish one. Character classes. Followers for upper-level player characters. Your players know that upon reaching certain levels and doing certain things, such as building a stronghold, they will be entitled to attract a body of followers. These followers might be fanatically loyal servants of the same deity or deities, in the case of clerics, stalwart admirers of fighters, or whatever. Your player will eventually turn to you for information on who or what they gain. And when the time actually comes, and they have reached the level and done the right things, you will be able to quickly inform each and every one concerned of what fate has decreed by the way of followers. Pause for a second here. Over to the chat. Very odd. I've lost connection to the chat. So if there's anything interesting happening in the chat, I am not able to see it. Let me see if I can pop it out here. Oh, there we go. We're back. For some reason, I couldn't see new chat posts, but it looks like it has caught up. Cool. All right. Where are we here? So different types of followers for clerics. So clerics can get things like heavy cavalry, medium cavalry, light cavalry, heavy infantry, blah, blah, blah. Fighters can get leaders, which could be 5th level, 6th level, 7th level, etc. You can get troops like light cavalry, a company of 80 heavy cavalry, a company of 60 crossbowmen, or 60 cavalry. So you can amass quite significant armies once you get to a high level and you start recruiting followers and building strongholds. Rangers roll 2d12 to find the number of followers or creatures attracted to service. When the number is generated, adjust the following percentile dice rolls as follow. If any addition or subtraction falls within a category no longer permissible, or if a subtraction results in a score under 1, roll again. When the number of rolls the ranger player character is entitled to is discovered, and the adjustment necessary noted, determine the following creatures using the tables below. All scores over 70 are special, and the ranger is able to attract 1 follower/creature group only from each category as noted. Add all creatures of any sort to find total followers, demi-humans included. So rangers can get quite the assortment of different things. They can get humans, demi-humans, animals, mounts like centaurs and hippogriffs, types of creatures, pseudo-dragons, satyrs, sprites, special creatures, including things like copper dragons, storm giants. So it looks like rangers get quite the variety of possible followers here. Thieves roll 4d6 to determine the number of lesser thieves which the character will attract. Determine race and level of each thereafter, modifying the D percentage roll for level as follows. So basically, thieves just attract more thieves. You're starting a thieves guild. They can be different races, and they can start with different levels. Multi-class thieves have a slightly different table. So assassins. Upon gaining Guildmaster, Guildmistress status, roll 7d4 to determine the number of lower-level assassins in the local guild. You may adjust this result according to the population of the area if you deem it necessary. After determining this number, find the race and level below, and then find which will stay. 75% will desert the guild, as noted in the player's handbook. All new assassins coming to fill the ranks will be first level, but race must be determined on the race of assassin table. It's really unfortunate that to run some of these systems, you actually need to have the player's handbook and this book open at the same time. Multi-classed assassin table. So if you're multi-classed assassin, you get slightly different options for recruiting other assassins. Grandfather/grandmother of assassins. That's weird. The leader of all assassins, a nominal title at times, will always have 28 followers of 2nd level through 8th level as follows. 1 8th level, 2 7th levels, 3 6th levels, 4 5th levels, 5 4 levels, 6 3rd levels, and 7 2nd levels. That's very specific. In addition, there will be from 4 to 16 1st level followers, dice for race using the table above. It is recommended that you develop henchmen for the grandfather/grandmother after discovering the abilities of his or her followers. Mercenary fighters and men-at-arms should suit the circumstances, but in general, they should be very well armed and equipped and include cavalry, infantry, and missile-armed troops as well. Naturally, should an NPC grandfather/grandmother of assassins be displaced by a player character, followers will be 75% likely to leave, as usual, but the new leader will eventually attract a following of up to 44 28 plus 4 to 16 assassins. The newcomers being found as if they were attracted to a new guildmaster of assassins, i.e. first level newcomers. One really annoying thing about the formatting here is that 4 to 16, that's clearly just 4d4. But he doesn't write 4d4, he writes 4 through 16. So you see that, and then you have to reverse engineer what dice you would have to roll to get that, which is really annoying. There's no reason why he couldn't have just wrote down the dice code there. But he does that throughout the whole book, from what I've seen. Unless the followers are a body, they will not come at the same time. After the conditions for obtaining such a following have been met, generate a random number from 1 to 30, d10 using a d6 to determine tens. 1 to 2 equals no addition, 3 to 4 equals add 10, 5 to 6 equals add 20 to the score of the d10. The result is the day after completion of the requirement on which the first follower will appear. In some cases, all of those coming. Thereafter, additional followers due to the character will arrive at intervals of 1 to 8 days until all have arrived. If there is no one available to receive them, they will wait from 1 to 4 days and then depart forever. In the latter case, the character has lost that follower forever. It is permissible to allow some henchman or servant to care for followers if the character designates such duty. Next section is the Paladin's Warhorse. When the Paladin reaches 4th or higher level, he or she will eventually call for a warhorse, as detailed in the player's handbook. It will magically appear, but not in actual physical form. The Paladin will magically see his or her faithful destrier in whatever locale it currently is in, and it is thereafter up to the Paladin to journey to the place and gain the steed. As a rule of thumb, this journey will not be beyond 7 days' ride, and gaining the mount will not be an impossible task. The creature might be wild and necessitate capturing, or might be guarded by an evil fighter of the same level as the Paladin, and the latter will then have to overcome the former in mortal combat in order to win the warhorse. That's kind of a cool rule, actually. I like that. In short, the gaining of the destrier is hopefully I'm saying that correct, destrier, a French word of some sort, is a task of some small difficulty which will take a number of days, possibly 2 or more weeks, and will certainly test the mettle of the Paladin. Once captured or won, the warhorse knows its role and relationship to the Paladin, and it will faithfully serve thereafter for 10 years. Thereafter, the Paladin must seek another mount, as the former one will be too old to be useful. The intelligence of a Paladin's warhorse is 5 to 7 points. The number of hit points per hit die of the steed will never be fewer than 50% of the level of the Paladin, i.e. a 4th level Paladin means that the warhorse he or she gains will have at least 2 hit points per hit die, excluding the additional bonus of +5, while a 16th level Paladin special steed will have a maximum hit points, 8 per die, of 5 times 8 equals 40 plus 5 additional hit points, equals 45 total hit points for 5 plus 5 hit dice. If the character loses Paladinhood for any reason, there will be an immutable enmity between the character and mount, and the former will not be able to ride the latter, while the steed will escape at the first opportunity. Destrier, says John H. Sounds about right, destrier. All right, I think we're going to go for about 15 more minutes. I will then have been reading this for 2 solid hours, which is about as much as my throat can take at any one time. Although this Guinness is certainly helping. All right, spying. In general, most spies will be hired assassins, although it is likely that some regular spies will be employed by player characters from time to time. Most spying missions will fall into the following categories. Simple. Missions which require information regarding the general state of defenses and number of troops or preparations for some activity. Simple missions require only the observations of the spy acting in a non-critical role, i.e. just being around as one of many individuals in the place. Difficult. Missions of this category require the spy to gain some secret information, such as plans, documents, maps, etc. Difficult missions require the spy to gain access to something or gain the confidence of someone. and so the spy must actively pursue his or her role in an outstanding manner. Extraordinary. Missions of long, complex, and hazardous nature, which require insinuation of the spy into an organization or operation, and the relay of detailed information on a continuing basis from the spy. Extraordinary missions require long-term association of the spy with his spied upon, and the continuing acquisition of general and specific information of highly detailed and secret nature. In simple missions, there is little risk of discovery, while risks become more likely in difficult missions, and very great in extraordinary missions. Where a player character is involved, spying missions are a matter of interaction according to the dictates of the player involved, through the DM, according to the situation as known by him and her, and the reactions of the spied upon. In the case of a non-player character undertaking a spying mission, a success table is used. That's kind of neat. So if you have an NPC spy and you send them off to do something, you can just roll on here, roll on here, and there is a simple percentage chance of success. That makes things nice and simple. I kind of like that. Time required to accomplish mission. The length of time necessary to travel to the region in which the spying activities to take place must be determined by the referee according to the circumstances. Once in the necessary locale, the spy will then take a variable period of time to accomplish the mission, or fail, according to the degree of difficulty of the task. Simple, 1 to 8 days. Difficult, 5 to 40 days. Extraordinary, as required. Extraordinary missions must be determined by the circumstances of the case. For example, a spy sent to become a member of a secret society might take a month to discover the recruiting requirements of the society, and then spend 1 or more months making himself or herself eligible to recruitment, and then becoming insinuated in the group. Thereafter, he or she would gain simple or difficult information according to the time requirements shown, and special information could be gained only as the individual gained more and more status within the organization through continued membership and seemingly outstanding contribution. Chance of discovery. There always exists a chance of discovery, no matter how simple the mission. The base chance to be discovered is a cumulative 1% per day of the time spent spying, subject to a maximum of 10% minus the level of the spy. Even if the latter brings chance of discovery to a negative percentage, there is always a 1% chance. Modifiers are dependent upon the precautions against spying taken by the spied upon. No precautions, 1% chance per week. Minimal precautions, modified percentage, 1 to 10% chance per week. Moderate precautions, modified percentage chance twice per week. Strong precautions, double modified percentage chance twice per week. Minimal precautions represent occasional checks on individuals and their activities and some watch on important information. Moderate precautions are simply more frequently carried out of minimal precautions and more careful questioning of anyone behaving in a suspicious manner. Strong precautions include many security checks on individuals and information, as well as counter-spies operating to discover any such activity. If a spy actually becomes a leader in a group, the chance for being detected then drops to that of a category of no precautions, as the individual is regarded as being above suspicion, i.e., only certain jealous or ferret-like operatives will still check on the individual. Chance of discovery will increase tenfold if a spy is caught, and another spy is still attempting to operate during a period of 20 to 50 days thereafter. To find if a spy is discovered, roll percentile dice according to the time period stated. If the mission takes only a fraction of the time stated, roll a third percentage die for the tenths of percent. Thus, 1% per week equals 0.14% chance per day. So a roll of 99.9% indicates discovery on a one-day mission. If a spy is discovered, go to the spy failure table below. Spy failure. If, after spending the requisite time, the spy rolls and is not successful, various possibilities exist. The results are determined on the table below. Note that this table is also used for spy discovery, with appropriate modifiers. Spy failure table. So there's 5 different categories here. You roll a percentage to see what happens. So this could be further attempts to gain success are possible, but time to accomplish the mission must again be determined. Any further spying attempts will be 90% likely to result in failure, discovery, and imprisonment. On a 61 through 80, Spy caught is in a suspicious act, imprisoned, and nothing further is heard. 81 through 95, spy is caught with positive proof of spying activity and is tortured. 1 to 2, dead. 3 to 4, revealed everything. 5 to 6, turncoat. On a 96 to 100, spy is killed or turns coat if counter spies are present. If counter spies are employed, they will give the spy false information and follow him or her to find where he or she came from and who sent him or her to spy in the first place. Modifiers: difficult mission, plus 10% on failure dice score. Extraordinary mission, minus 5% on failure dice score. Discovered equals plus 25% on failure dice score. Fanatical spies. Spies who are absolutely dedicated to their master or a cause cannot be assassins normally hired to spy. But such can exist. These spies will never become double agents. On any dice roll over 60, they simply kill themselves. CF, expert hirelings for the cost of non-player character spies. Thief abilities. The following additional explanations of thief abilities will help you prevent abuse of these activities by thieves and other characters able to use these abilities in whole or in part in your campaign. Roll of the dice for any thief function must be kept absolutely secret, so the thief or a similar character does not know the results. Backstabbing. Opponents aware of the thief will be able to negate the attack form. Certain creatures, Otyugs, slimes, molds, etc., either negate surprise or have no definable back, thus negating the ability. Picking pockets. Failure allows additional attempts. The victim might notice and allow the thief to operate anyway in order to track him or her back to the place he or she uses as a headquarters. Up to 2 attempts at picking a lock can be made during a round. Picking a pocket, Opening locks. The act of picking the lock to be opened can take from 1 to 10 rounds, depending on the complexity of the lock. As a rule, most locks will take but 1 to 4 rounds of time to pick. Finding and removing traps. Use the same time requirements for opening locks. Time counts for each function. Small or large traps can be found, but not magical or magically hidden traps. Moving silently. Silent movement is the same as normal exploratory movement, i.e. 12 feet per round as the thief creeps up. Croodles. What on earth is a croodle? Upon the area or victim or whatever. Do not inform the thief that his or her dice score indicated a lack of success at this attempted stealth, if that is the case. He or she thinks the movement is silent, and the monster or other victim will inform the character of his or her misapprehension soon enough. Hide in shadows. As is plainly stated in Player's Handbook, this is never possible under direct or even indirect observation. If the thief insists on trying, allow the attempt and throw dice, but don't bother to read them, as the fool is as obvious as a coal pile in a ballroom. Likewise, if a hidden thief attempts movement while under observation, the proverbial jig is up for him or her. Naturally, a creature closely pressed in melee is not likely to bother with looking for some thief not directly in the line of sight. But if vision would normally extend to the thief's area of activity, then observation rules apply. Unobserved attempts to hide in shadows must likewise stand the hazard of the dice roll. A score greater than the required number shows that the character thinks that the character's ability is not on a par with his or her intent. And although he or she thinks hiding has been successful, the creature looking in that direction will note a suspicious outline, form, or whatever. Note that a thief hiding in shadows is still subject to detection, just as if he or she was invisible. See Invisibility, Detection of Invisibility table. Hearing noise. This is pretty straightforward. The thief, just as any other character, must take off helmet or other obstructing headgear in order to press his or her ear to the door surface in order to hear beyond. Climbing walls. This is probably the most abused thief function, although hiding in shadows vies for the distinction. The ability to climb walls is something which is acquired through training and practice, just as most of the other functions of the thief. The rate at which vertical or horizontal movement is possible depends upon the texture and other conditions of the surface. So wall climbing table, feet per round of climbing. The wall could be very smooth but cracked, fairly rough, and some cracks, very rough, and rough with some ledges or many projections. And that's going to give you a condition of surface and therefore how fast you can move. Slightly slippery surfaces double the chances of slipping and falling. Slippery surfaces make chances of slipping and falling 10 times more likely. Thus, a slippery surface cannot be attempted successfully by any thief under 6th level, and even a 10th level thief has a 10% chance per round of slipping and falling. Be certain to check each round of vertical or horizontal movement for chance of slipping and falling. Surfaces which are inclined inwards move towards greater degrees of difficulty. A non-slippery one being treated as slightly slippery, and a slippery one being virtually unclimbable. Surfaces inclined away from the perpendicular on an outward angle may be treated as either a better surface condition or rougher texture, if the degree of incline is sufficient to make climbing easier. Most dungeon walls will fall into the fairly rough or to rough category. Some will be non-slippery, most will be slightly slippery due to the dampness and slime growth. That's a great picture. This book could definitely use more art. Some great art later on. Read languages. This ability assumes that the language is, in fact, one which a thief has encountered sometime in the past. Ancient and strange languages, those you, as DM, have previously designated as such, are always totally unreadable. Even if able to read a language, the thief should be allowed only to get about that percentage of the meaning of what is written as his or her percentage ability to read the language in the first place. The rest that they will have to guess at. Languages which are relatively close to those known by the thief will not incur such a penalty. Thieves and assassins setting traps. Simple mechanical traps can be set by thieves or assassins. The chance to do so successfully is equal to that of the chance shown for detecting such traps, but in this case the assassin operates at an ability level equal to 2 levels above his or her own, and exactly as if he were or she were a thief, e.g., a 5th level assassin has the same chance of setting up a trap as a 7th level does. Simple traps are those which involve mechanical components, which the character setting them has normal access to, such as arrow traps, tripwires, and spring-propelled missiles. Special devices such as poison needles, scything blades, and any similar traps with special mechanical components will also require the efforts of one or more specialists, those required to manufacture the component parts. Whenever a thief or assassin character desires to set a trap, require him or her to furnish you a simple drawing to illustrate how the trap will function. That's really fun. I like that idea. Get them to actually design the trap. If the chance to successfully set the trap results in failure, there is a chance of causing injury to the trap setter, just as if he or she had set such a trap off. This chance is rolled for separately and is the obverse of the chance for successfully setting up the trap. Okay. The drawing of the trap will modify the chances for injury in cases where failure results. Modification can be upwards or downwards according to the complexity and danger of the trap. Note that even with a prepared mechanism for a poison needle, for example, the trap must be set and failure can result. Gloves or protective headwear cannot be worn when setting such traps. Finally, failure on the first attempt to set a trap does not mean that the thief or assassin can never set the trap. Unlike other similar thief functions, repeated attempts are permissible. So that's really interesting. I really like the idea that you have to draw a picture of what you're trying to do, and then the DM can modify the chances of success based on that, or more importantly, figure out what's going to happen when you fail, right? So if you fail and the trap collapses, in what way will this horrible thing injure you? It's going to depend on the way that you set it up. That's really cool. It involves a lot of player creativity. They're going to get more involved in the world, and they'll be thinking specifically about what they're doing. So they're not going to be deploying these sort of generic traps. You're going to have to get specific and think about how this will affect the world in a very concrete way. All right, it is 9:30. I've been reading for 2 hours, so I think I'm going to pause here. I probably will pick up at some point in the future. Most likely, I will put a notification on Twitter when I plan to do another reading of this. And you'll probably get notified on YouTube as well. So make sure you're subscribed and hit the bell icon. That should make sure that you get notified when I'm preparing another stream. This has been really interesting. Parts of this book are incredibly dry, but there's these little tidbits of cool stuff that I hadn't thought of that are just kind of springing out. I'm waiting to get into more of that as we get further along. But already it's been very enlightening. And it's fun to just sort of like delve directly into Gary's mind and the way that he thought about this. Although the notion that he used all of this stuff is, like I said, pretty unlikely. He seemed to like very simple, fast rules, and he was really writing all of these dense restrictions for tournament play in order to standardize the game. But anyway, thank you for joining me. I hope that you had fun hanging out, drawing some maps, doing some D&D stuff, and stay safe out there. And I'll see you guys next time.